Now live.
Good afternoon and welcome to this meeting of the Cambridgeshire Police and Crime Panel. I am Edward Lee, Chair of the panel. I would like to begin by welcoming those members of the public and press who are watching the live stream of this meeting via the Peterborough City Council's YouTube page. Due to the government guidance on social distancing, this meeting is being held remotely. The minutes of the meeting will be produced in the usual way, and a recording of the meeting will be available to view on the Peterborough City Council's YouTube page. Can I ask members of the panel to keep their video cameras switched on for the duration of the meeting, and for all participants to keep their microphone muted except when invited to speak. The Acting Commissioner and his staff have opted for security reasons to join us via telephone, and therefore their faces will not appear on the live stream, but as a phone symbol instead. Please use the electronic hand function to indicate if you wish to speak. If we should run into any technical difficulties, I will declare an adjournment while the fault is addressed, and the public broadcast will be paused. If it is not possible to address the fault in the meeting may be abandoned until such time as it can be reconvened. I will start with a roll call of panel members. Councillor Ali.
Present. Good afternoon, everyone.
Councillor Bywater.
Present, Chairman.
Councillor Daunton.
Hello, yes, present.
Councillor Giles. Not present yet. Councillor Massey.
Present.
Councillor Sharp.
Present.
Councillor Shannons.
Here.
Councillor Tierney.
Present, Chairman, and my video is off because I've got technical difficulties.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn.
Present.
Councillor Warren.
Good afternoon, I'm present.
Councillor Wiggin.
Present.
Independent member Claire George.
Good afternoon. Yes, I'm here. Thank you.
Thank you. So we also have in attendance Fiona Macmillan, the monitoring officer to the panel, Jane Webb, the secretariat to the panel, Ray Risley, the acting police and crime commissioner, John Lee, director of finance and resource at the OPCC, Jim Haylett, the chief executive at the OPCC, Nikki Phillipson, head of strategic partnerships and commissioning at the OPCC, Christina Strood, head of policy for fire and police at the OPCC, and Matthew Warren, chief finance officer at the OPCC. So if I could start, Jane, do we have any apologies?
No apologies received. Just Councillor Lynn is present as substitute for Councillor Walwark.
Thank you. Do any members wish to declare a pecuniary interest or non-statutory disclosable interest? Could you please raise your hand? Councillor Massey.
I'm a candidate in the Police and Crime Commissioner elections.
Thank you. I'm not seeing any other hands. Okay, thank you. So moving on to the minutes of the meeting held on 3rd of February 2021. Are there any points, any corrections or additions I would like to have noted? I'm not seeing any raised hands. I'd just like to note a very minor change on page 6, item H, the two instances of the word representable to be changed to representative. So members happy for me to sign these when I'm able to as a accurate record of the meeting. See no dissent. Okay, thank you. So moving on to item number 4, the Acting Commissioner's response to the panel's recommendations. Now we have a letter from the Acting Commissioner responding to our query about the sorry, just scrolling down to it. So about the crime and disorder grants. Do any members wish to ask the Acting Commissioner any questions about this? Councillor Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. Hi, Ray. How you doing? I don't really want to go back over everything that we've already sort of discussed and where we're going with it. I was just wondering if you could sort of give this panel some idea of how you think that these changes will benefit the CSPs.
Thank you, Councillor Lynn, for your question. I think it's going to be down to the new Police and Crime Commissioner when they come in, how that is worked. But I think the way that is planned moving forward, it will hopefully give a better response to things that are happening within your communities, because you'll have a number of CSPs working together to resolve the issue rather than just the individual CSPs. I think that this is something that will benefit not only the CSPs but the community, and also be financially better.
Okay, thank you. Can I just say as well, thanks to Jim for sending me the email as he promised to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Massey.
Yes, so this is quite news to me as a CSP that sits on the Cambridge City CSP and the county-wide CSP group, that there's going to be changes to the funding, in that it won't be going to each individual CSP, as I understand it. This is my understanding, so please do correct me if I'm wrong. Then it will be going, work will be given via one pot, and that all CSPs will be working together, which, I mean, working together is not a bad thing. My concern is each CSP, the reason why we have each CSP in each area is because our areas are so different. You know, we have city issues, we have rural issues, and it's important that that's recognised, because the reason why we're there is we want each area to have its own voice and to be able to deal with the issues that are coming up and be alive to those issues. My concern, it's more of a question, I guess, Commissioner, is whether this will actually lead to a decrease in the actual amount of funding, or are we going to have a pot of money that's the same pot of money and that it's not going to be decreased? That's my concern, is that what we're looking at is a cut to funding for this. And it says, to be clear, the funding will be available for purpose of crime and disorder reduction, but it doesn't actually say whether it's going to any of the CSPs actually. And so I've just got a concern as to what is actually happening, because it's not clear, and to highlight that each CSP is different. And that's why we don't have one big CSP. We have individual ones because we are individual.
Thank you. As you know, this was discussed at the last meeting, but rather than the amount of funding that was given out individually, when you put that together, there will be more funding this time. And when you look at whether it's county or whether it's out in the fens, we know that there are differences. So 2 or 3 CSPs coming together to work on a project, that would be better than those individuals working on their own and getting to a lower level, whereas together with the funding put together, you should get to a higher level. And that's the kind of idea behind it. So instead of 2 CSPs working and getting to one level, put them together and use that funding in a better way to reach a higher level of response to whatever that project is. I hope that helps, but there will hopefully, and it is planned that there will be more funding available.
Chair, you're on mute.
You're muted.
Sorry. Thank you, Acting Commissioner. Could you just clarify then, does that mean that individual CSPs will simply be forging alliances, if you like, on an ad hoc basis in order to bid for funding? That it's not going to be a block grant to be shared between for individual CSPs to divide up between themselves. They will group together and make a bid to the Commissioner's office. Is that how you envisage it working?
Thank you. This will be a decision for the new Commissioner, how they decide to allot the grant and what comes forward. But as I say, it is up to the new commissioner. There is more funding there, and it's not to say that one CSP cannot come forward with an idea on their own to put forward. That may actually be something the other ones may want to take on. So it's not saying that you can't come forward as an individual, but it's envisaged that CSPs will work together.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes. Acting Commissioner, could you perhaps explain what the mechanism was or is for making this decision? How was it made, and who was consulted on the making of it?
Thank you. There were decisions made, but I'd like to hand over to Jim, who has a lot more information on this, please.
Thank you, Commissioner. So if I could just remind panel members, the money for this grant actually is part of the overall budget that the Commissioner receives, and effectively there is no additional money from government for this. This is out of the core grant and precept. So the amount that the Commissioner awards via this particular grant is a matter for the Commissioner. Any remaining money obviously is within the constabulary's budget, but effectively any money spent on this crime and disorder grant would come out of the constabulary's budget. So it is a matter for the Commissioner in terms of the balance between the resource given to the Chief Constable and the resource given to the crime and disorder grant and therefore the CSPs. And I think it's also worth highlighting as I put in the background to the letter that went out about the value of the crime and disorder grants compared to the mainstream resources that the partners sitting around the CSP, the Community Safety Partnership table actually bring to the local resolution of crime and disorder. In terms of the approach that was taken for this, at the Countywide Community Safety Board, which I think was either October or November, this approach was discussed because the grant period was ending 31st of March, and the current Commissioner took the opinion that a new Commissioner would come with a new police and crime plan, bearing in mind we're still working with one that is now in its 5th year. So the new Commissioner would come with a new police and crime plan and then determine what the approach to these grants would be. In some ways, a new Commissioner could determine not to give any of this money to the CSPs. They could give it individually, they could do it collectively, they could put it towards COVID recovery of community safety. As I say, there is no government rules or any regulations on what these grants are for, because it's part of the Commissioner's core budget. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Ali?
Thank you very much. In light of what Jim has said, that's put a slightly different perspective on all this because it's really in the remit of the new Police and Crime Commissioner. However, since we are discussing this, and we have been discussing this, it's very important that we recognise that Cambridgeshire and Peterborough is quite a unique area, unique county, very diverse, not just in terms of its demographics, but also geography as well. And we need to make sure the resources are targeted where the most need is, basically. I welcome the fact that the acting commissioner is saying there's going to be more money available, which is always welcome for local projects. But I just want to make sure that no one loses out. And I just want that reassurance from the acting police and crime commissioner.
Thank you, Councillor Ali. I'd just like to say that this is, as Jim has already said, up to the new Police and Crime Commissioner that comes in. If it was me, I would definitely make sure that nobody misses out. But as I say, it's up to the new Police and Crime Commissioner. What I didn't want to do was make a decision for this funding and tie the new Police and Crime Commissioner into something that they find hard to get out of and wasn't in what they regard as their police and crime plan moving forward.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Thank you, Chairman. I've had my say. Thank you.
Welcome. Okay, so are members happy to note the letter? Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 5. Do we have, sorry, just getting that. Jane, do we have any public questions or statements?
No, no questions have been received.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item 6, review of complaints. Has the panel received any complaints?
No, no complaints received.
Thank you. So moving then on to the first substantive item, item number 6, the report on non-crime related demand on policing. Acting Commissioner, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you. Just before I do that, I would like to ask at the end of my reporting on today's items that I get a chance to do my reflections on my term, as this is my last Police and Crime Panel meeting in this office.
Certainly, yes.
Thank you. But you have received the report that was put out to you, and the recommendation is for the panel moving forward. And I'm happy that everybody will have read this, and so I'm happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner. Are there any members who would like to start with questions? So, Councillor Massey.
Yes, thank you, Acting Commissioner. So I'm going to talk on a few points, so please do bear with me. First point, page 21, 4.3, talking about not having the data or not asking the Chief Constable in regards to how much time and money is spent on non-policing issues. And as much as I absolutely agree that in the time when we're asking our police force to do so much more because of the COVID pandemic, that it now might not be the right time to get that data, but we do need that data in the future. And the reason why I say that is because it really is important to understand that cost, including time and money, and time is money, so that the Commissioner can be the voice of the public when they're talking to central government and people in ministers in Westminster, and also to be able to lend their voice to call for more funding for those areas that the police are currently having to pick up. Let's face it, if we could get more funding, so if we know how much money this is actually costing the constabulary, and we can say this is how much it's costing us, if you guys spent it on mental health services, for example, then we can spend our money on something better. So I really do think that that is quite key, important information that does need to be collated in some form. The other point I've got is on page 23, 6.2, talking about how to work, that you're working closely with partners. And of course, it's really important because partnership working is key in preventing crime. But it's stated again that a definite figure about how many calls having to be diverted to partner agencies rather than the police to deal with. We need that data because, and I said this 3 years ago, I think it was, to the previous Commissioner, Jason Ablewhite, that we really do need to see where other agencies need to step up and improve their communication. So, for instance, if the police are getting calls that are actually for mental health services or for City Council, County Council, or other services, we need to make sure that those services are aware so that they can improve their communication so that police time is not being used on those. And so I think it really is important that we do that. And I totally understand on 6.3, talking about working together to prevent reoffending is key, so I totally agree on that. On the actual papers and the information that was given, you've got down hoax slash abandon call. I think that needs to be extrapolated even further, because a hoax and abandon call is totally different. Also on that, you've got for public safety on licensing, it currently says 0%. What is the actual number of how many times have the police been called in to go and do some work with licensing? Because I'm just quite interested to know whether there was any calls for that at all. In the crime bit, you've got sexual offence. Does that include sexual harassment? Because sexual harassment kind of sits somewhere else outside of sexual offence. Some thoughts on that would be interesting. And again, on the admin, you've got contact, message, advice. Again, this is where that data collecting to know exactly what advice, contact, messaging was having to be given, so that we can make sure that our partners are also working to make sure the police are dealing with policing issues as much as possible. I think that was all my points.
Thank you for those points. What I've got to say is that because these are not crime related, doesn't mean that the police do not have a duty to actually deal with them. So there may be instances where the police are dealing with things which there isn't a crime, but it is down to people's health and safety, etc. So that will work. You did ask for this level of information in moving forward. So the information that you talked about in your final note, it was what was asked for, and you can ask the next Police and Crime Commissioner or ask here and we can get that to you at the next one, but that is the level of information we have at the moment. The other point I want to make is this year is not a typical year. This year the police have been caught up in COVID, so the figures that you have in front of you are not typical. And yes, I understand that it is really interesting to have those figures and to be able to go to London and quote those figures to government. But what we've got to do is not just ask for better funding for us, but it's our partners as well. So we have to support our partners, whether it's health, whether it's councils, because unless they get the extra funding as well, then more is going to land in front of the police. So we have to work with the partnership to make sure that we all get better funding, and funding in a way that is going to benefit the whole of the public and all the partners involved. We can't just expect the police, because if the police get more funding and nobody else does, then the police still are going to get that extra funding. So it's not necessarily that the NHS are not doing mental health. It's maybe they don't have the funding to do the 24-hour mental health support in the way that the public are requiring it. So it's working with those units to make sure that they get the right funding as well. But until then, we have to all work and do what we can for the public. And at the end of the day, the public is the main reason for having the police out there. And if it happens to be something that is non-police and the police are there, they take action. So we do get calls about it, and we will keep getting calls about it, and the police will respond where possible. I hope that helps.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Thank you, Chairman. So really it's helpful that this item has come shortly after we were discussing community safety partnership funding. So if we look at 6.3, 6.5, 6.6 in the paper, we see the importance of a safety partnership working. And I just really wanted to come back to the earlier point to say that there are times when, and particularly into a non-crime related policing, where working together in larger groups is important. But this makes the point very well that working locally and at a very local level is important, and that's where the partnership can be just as effective. And I just wanted to pick up on a tiny point. In 6.5, you say, but at a place-based level, e.g. county-wide approach, I would rather think of a place-based level at a district, right, a much more local approach, because as we've said before, each of our areas is very different. So I hope that that can be taken on board in relation to non-violent, non-crime related policing, that we've got to be to do some really detailed work and to bear in mind the role of the partnerships and the role of policing within those wider partnerships.
Thank you. And yes, I know what you're saying about the CSPs, but as I said, we have a police and crime plan that's been going for 5 years. We have a new police and crime commissioner who will be coming in, who will change that police and crime plan. And I don't want to tie that commissioner into anything that is against what they're proposing. This is why I haven't put that money out to the CSPs. It'll be up to the new commissioner, and it will be up to you as a panel to maybe make your representations, and for the CSPs to make their representations to the police and crime commissioner through the office, to make sure that you get the funding for the CSPs where it's required. But at the moment, I know how I would do it, but I can't speak on behalf of what a new commissioner may be wanting to do. But I don't want to take that funding away from the commissioner when they come in. But we have left extra money above the amount that was used in the last few years on an individual year. So hopefully all your issues will be taken forward by the new police and crime commissioner, and you can make your points to them. But at the moment, until that comes into force, I will not be making any grants to any CSPs from the new year's funding.
Thank you. So, Councillor Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to say really that this question or this request for this information about the 80% non-crime related issues was made because of the on the budget, was on the budget meeting where we agreed to raise precept. So that when we agreed to raise precept, then we look and see that 80% is non-crime related. So the question was raised so that we can then decide, we can get the information about what this 80%, the breakdown of what this 80% non-crime is, so that we can look at these and see if these can be dealt with in other areas that maybe the police don't have to, so that the police don't have to deal with them, and then focus more on the crime related issues that are affecting our communities. So to not have that information, it is a little bit disappointing. But because also we have to understand is that if we've got 80% that is non-crime related being dealt with by police that doesn't need to be dealt with by police, and we're paying for that, and we're raising taxes to pay for that, that are pushing another bracket of people down into that poverty line, which then increases them sort of situations, then we're creating a false economy. So it would be nice if we could have that, and we could sort of try and help and work together to find new ways of doing things, or new agencies or new partners that can help with these things, so that we don't have to keep raising taxes that pushes more brackets down into the poverty line, and help you do your job and work better on the crime related issues. I think that was the reason that we wanted that information.
Thank you. You did get a full in-depth report on the precept and what the precept was for, and about non-crime related issues. For instance, I can give you something that happened when, as the deputy, I went out on a patrol with roads policing. It had been a busy night in the hospitals, and I was just starting with the roads policing unit. And before the briefing, they got a call where somebody was having a medical issue. There were no ambulances ready at that point to respond to that person. But the police went out, and I was in that vehicle. They went out to that person with a defibrillator and other medical equipment, so that they could ensure that that person was kept safe and alive until the ambulance came. So there are things that they do, and there's good reason behind them. And that is never going to change, where other people like the ambulance service need to respond to things as well, but cannot because they are overwhelmed. So the force will respond to those. But as I say, you had a comprehensive briefing of what the precept would be providing within the police. So I hope that has helped you.
Chair,
Thank you.
Jim Haylett, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, if I can draw everyone's attention to page 26, I think this on the appendix. This is the actual breakdown that the Chief Constable provided to us in terms of where the 80% figure comes from. So I do need to stress that it's the request was the statement that led to the request was about 80% being non-crime. But it absolutely doesn't mean it's not the police's role. And I think that slide there, page 26, where it talks about the 178,000 incidents raised, displays how many non-crime activities the police, by definition, do have to be involved in. I mean, if you look at the transport ones as an example, there's nothing there that would jump out at me that would suggest that they are not police matters. Similarly with the antisocial behaviour and most, if not all, of the public safety matters. So, you know, and I think this is part of the reason why the constabulary would have difficulty, and I think all constabularies would have difficulty actually putting any kind of price tag on this. Because when calls are received in the first place, so, you know, for example, a safety or security concern, the police can't, you know, they obviously can find out at the time of taking the call what the incident is, but they can't truly establish the nature of their involvement and whether a crime has been committed, for instance, until they've attended. So, as I say, it absolutely is not the case that 80% of the police's time is being spent on non-police matters. Thank you.
Can I just come back on that? Yeah, thanks for that, Jim. That is helpful. But perhaps when in future when we put then not crime related issues, that we change that to what is policing issues and what is not policing issues that you're dealing with, if you see what I mean. Because when you say non-crime related issues, to me that could mean anything, and maybe to a lot of the public that could mean anything. But when you explain it like this, which is helpful in these meetings, which is why we have these meetings, that we can explain it rather than just reading it on a piece of paper, it is a lot more helpful.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, appreciate what has been said so far on this issue. And I think it's commendable what our police are expected to do beyond the call of duty during these challenging times. And sadly, it is a reflection of underfunding of our public sector organizations over the last decade or so, really. I think we can't shy away from that. NHS is underfunded, police are underfunded, we're not adequately funded, so we've got this challenge. I think my question is that when members of the public read that 80% of the time that the police spent is on non-crime related, as Andrew just put it very eloquently, they see a different picture. They say, look, and I received a message this morning and a 20-minute telephone call today in the Netherton area. People are victims of crime, being broken in, cars broken in, catalytic converters being stolen. And people are telling me that they're not getting the response. The frustrations is overwhelming when I'm out in the street, the calls I'm getting. So when people read that 80% of the police, they're not getting the response when they're victims of crime, and those frustrated, and people have stopped complaining. They've stopped reporting crime, especially in wards like mine, where I represent a diverse community. English is a second language. So, you know, it really is difficult. And I can't take away the fantastic work our police are doing, basically. But these are unprecedented. And I think we need to find ways where locally partnership working can be more effective. And I'm not saying, as Jim has said, that, you know, that work, obviously keeping us safe, is important as well. But we cannot get the confidence of the public when we are putting statements like this, that 80% of the police time is being spent on non-crime related issues. And that's not going down well with the public that I represent. Thank you.
Chair, if I may.
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah, just a point of clarification. The 80% figure is the 80% of incidents, not necessarily time, because clearly these figures won't capture an awful lot of the crime work in terms of the difference in the time spent dealing with individual crimes. So if you consider something like, for instance, county lines, serious and organised crime, and counter-terrorism work, that none of that would amount to many actual incidents and crimes recorded, but a huge portion of time would be spent up in those areas. And so, as I say, and this is why it becomes a very complex issue to try and identify time spent on some of these as well. But I think it's just worth emphasising, it's not only 20% of police time spent on crime, it's just 20% of the incidents that they respond to, is my understanding.
Okay. Chairman, if I can through you, I appreciate that, Jim, that explanation. We, those of us sitting in this meeting, we are reasonably well versed in reading and scrutinizing these reports. These are public documents. These are public documents. And if we are getting a different interpretation of what we've seen in that report, just imagine what perception we are giving to the public out there. So we may need to find a different way of presenting these figures, because at the moment, the way that things stand, people are reading that report quite different to what you just explained to us.
Thank you. Chair, if I can, it's when you get these explanations, this is where the panel can actually help in explain to people exactly what the figures are. We try and do it as best we can through our media, but you have councils, you have your wards that you represent. Maybe you can help by supporting the information going out as to what it actually really means, as Jim has mentioned.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner. I think we certainly take that on board, but I think we also perhaps need to support the OPCC in maybe changing the messaging so that the confusion doesn't arise in the first place. Councillor Massey.
Yes, I think the key here is about the narrative that's being used. And this is not new narrative. This is a narrative that we've heard over and over and over again here on the panel, where we've heard the previous Police and Crime Commissioners say 80% of policing time is taken up by non-policing related matters. And the focus has been very much on that. And when you look at the language used in the document, 80% non-crime related demand on policing, it does say, it has that narrative of, oh my goodness, of what exactly are the police spending their time on, knowing we know what you guys spend their time on. And Jim, thank you so much for your explanation, because it is really important. And I'm pleased that these sessions are recorded so that it's there for the public to hear. But the message that we need to be taking to our wards and to our residents isn't, oh, by the way, the panel says this. It should be, this document here tells you everything you need to know. And currently this document causes more red flags and incorrect, and then there isn't any red flags, I don't think, but it does cause red flags. And that's why we've spent quite a lot of time now talking about it. So I think in the future, we need to have a think about the narrative that is being used when we're talking about the percentage of policing's time. And as Councillor Lynn said, the bit that we're concerned about is if there's any work that the police are doing that they shouldn't have to be doing, not about what are the police doing, although that is obviously a matter for the panel too. That's it.
Thank you for your comments.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. Nikki's took away most of what I was going to start to say, because basically, as you said, this was the comments we had from the previous Police and Crime Commissioner, that why things couldn't be done and why the funding didn't allow. And really just picking up on as Jim pointed out, on the table on page 26, I think that's a good starting point, and not wishing to give more work to the panel, but I think in whatever form we are after the elections, I think this should be what we should be using this as a base to dig behind some of these figures and data to actually get a better understanding of that 80%, because it quite clearly is not, as Jim quite rightly says, we were certainly given the impression that it was 80% non-police related, if that's maybe a better way of describing it, and obviously that's not the case. So I think it's a good start at that table, but I'm sure others may agree or not, but I think as a panel we need to start use that as one of our items to do some lot more digging on in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Sharp. I think where it says it is non-crime related demand, I think that's where maybe you might want to start looking in the future. Thank you.
Okay, so I'm not seeing any other hands up. So there was just one further point I wanted to add, which was that the table on the page 20, is it 26, 25 or 26, it appears that the figures for the admin breakdown, these look suspiciously similar to the figures on the public safety. I think, Jim, you may be able to confirm that there's been an error in accidentally copying those percentages over from one table to another.
We can check that and get back to you if there's any difference, if that's okay. Thank you.
Thank you. So I just wanted to draw this to a conclusion with some recommendations. So from our discussions, it appears that the panel would like to re-request that breakdown of demand of incidents in which the hoax and abandon calls are split, in which sexual harassment is identified, which is clearly within either sexual offences or some other category at the moment, and also to make any corrections to the figures if there are any errors. Were there any other requests? Councillor Massey, did you have any other requests on that particular point?
I think it's just about being mindful of language. So
yeah. So yes, so those are requests specifically about the figures, and I think if the panel would also like to make a recommendation of reviewing how this information is presented to the public, and in particular this term non-crime related demand, that perhaps a term that's less misleading, because the fact is this has misled the panel and we are far better informed than the general public. So I think if we are getting the wrong end of the stick, then we can be pretty sure that the general public is, and a number of members have made that point. And also, I think we would also like to recommend that the constabulary, the Commissioner would like to discuss with the constabulary how referrals to other agencies are recorded, because clearly this is an important metric and it's not being collected at the moment. And finally, that I think it's clear that given that there is concern about the demand on police time for matters which aren't or shouldn't be police matters, that we kind of need to quantify that. I think we now really understand about how incidents fall into different categories, but I think we now need to look at how time and resource is allocated So I think if there's anything else that panel members would like to add to those recommendations, I don't see any hands. So could I just ask Councillor Massey?
Just because the comments, because they weren't answered, about how we define hoax, abandoned calls.
Yes, I've mentioned that. Yeah.
Okay, and okay, fab.
Okay, so would anyone like to second those recommendations? Councillor Massey. Thank you. Would anyone, do all panel members support this recommendation? Does anyone dissent? Okay, yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay, so we will make those recommendations. Okay, so and otherwise is the panel happy to note this report? Thank you. Okay, so moving on to item number 8. This is the overview of capital financing, so 2021 to 2022 to the financial year 2024 to 25. Acting Commissioner, would you like to introduce this item?
Thank you. I think the report is there for you to read, and we'll just take any questions on this. Thank you.
So members, if you'd like to, so Councillor Massey.
I like it when people don't do big introductions. That's great. It keeps meetings nice and short. Yes, I do have some points. So on page 28, on 4.4, it mentions that the funding is also required not just for the police station being built in Milton, but also further investments in ICT and national initiatives like the emergency services network upgrade. And it also goes on to say about some other things that are being, projects that are being worked in partnership with the 3 counties. My point really is, if this is a national initiative, why is this not being funded by central government? You could argue the same for the police station. If the police station needs to be upgraded because it needs to be upgraded, why are we not getting funding from central government for this? Why is this going back to the public purse? My concern is that we can see the impact that this is going to have, because you've listed it out quite well as to the cost of repaying this loan and the interest on that. And that cost is going to fall back onto our residents in the form of the increase year on year that we're already seeing of the preset, which is something that is really done with a bad taste in our mouths, because it's hurting our residents and it goes around in circles. So that's my question really on that. I got real concerns because, you know, when we're looking at spending this much money, and yet we've tried to save 1.7 million by cutting the PCSO's, the Community Saviour Team Inquiry Officer posts, kind of pales into insignificance. And so my question really is have we had any discussions with central government about funding some of these national initiatives centrally and not putting it on to the force?
Thank you. A lot of this comes out from the amount that we get from the government. But if I could hand over to Matt, if Matt could take this, please.
Yes, certainly. Thank you, Councillor Massey. Good afternoon, panel. Just in terms of ESN, so the one you picked up on, Emergency Services Network. Now, this is a project that's running across all of the emergency services. It's been hampered, should we say, with some delays over a period of time. And there is going to be some funding. However, certainly forces and other services around have choices as well to make, and some of that choice will mean that they themselves will have to fund some of the choices they make, certainly in terms of the infrastructure they're taking on. So there's a little bit of, but it's a bit both ways effectively, Councillor Massey. But ultimately, we need to ensure that we have the best communication methods for us all. And in terms of the funding, there is an amount, but unfortunately it doesn't cover it all at this stage.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to know, really, as we're borrowing a lot of money right now, that is probably going to be then projected onto our children to pay. Are there any plans to raise the funds to pay this money back over this time, or is it going to be solely put onto our communities to pay it back?
Thank you, Councillor Lind. Do you want me to take that one as well, Commissioner?
Yes, please, if you don't mind.
Okay, so a couple of things. Yeah, we've clearly, as you see from the report, there are a number of current loans that we have in place. They are at higher rates than we can currently borrow. So borrowing rates are low. I think that's the first thing I'd like to add. Certainly in the short term, they look as though they're going to continue to be low. We are taking out now maturity loans, so effectively we'll just be looking to pay back effectively the interest in the short term. They're interest-only loans, so the burden is pushed out, and I get that point around the burden being pushed out, but we have to account for that in our revenue budget, and we have to set money aside to pay back that loan in 50 years' time. So in terms of that 50-year loan, we're only putting a small amount aside. So hopefully the burden isn't significant for the time being, but it will recover over the longer term. In terms of other things we're doing, clearly the Southern Police Station is the majority of that debt, and we're looking ultimately to find the best sale option, best income option for that site, and that will look to repay some of that significant debt in the short term, as and when we get the income from that site. So we have got a number of strategies that we're looking at just to maximise the return, so we don't have that burden longer term.
Thank you. Can I just clarify the relationship between the current loans and the future investment loans? So if I've understood it correctly, we sort of enter this new programme with £17.5 million of debt. So therefore, the peak total debt will be a shade under 86 million in 2023-24. Is that correct?
Yeah. Then we look to pay a significant amount of that back. That's correct.
Yeah.
Hopefully.
Yes, indeed. So on the 5.2, the ratio of financing costs, this goes out to 24-25. Now, if I understood correctly, the plan is to repay a large chunk of this debt from the sale of Parkside, which will then come into the account in 2025-26. So therefore, hopefully the borrowing will drop significantly then. But what this has shown is that in 2024-25, 2.62% of the entire policing budget will be required simply to service the outstanding debt at that point. And that, which is 1.8% more than is currently having to be found out of the budget. Does this concern you, or do you feel that you've got this covered?
Basically, we're under borrowed at the moment, Councillor Lee. So we are not a debt-laden authority. Now, clearly, we are going to increase our debt for a short period of time. But as it stands, it doesn't concern me, that sort of level. 2.6%, 3% is perfectly reasonable, certainly in terms of local government and the broader local government sector in terms of a cost of carrying borrowing. So it doesn't concern me at that level at the moment. And what you'll tend to find with other authorities, they may not take the debt, but what they will be doing is effectively paying capital costs off through their revenue budget. So they're effectively just financing it in a slightly different way. But certainly at the moment, as long as we can keep it to that level and actually maximise the amount we get back from Parkside, then I'm more than comfortable. Clearly, there's still a risk with obviously the return on Parkside that doesn't factor into these figures at this stage.
I think the point I was making is not so much whether it's an absolute risk, but it's more that there is going to be this additional chunk coming out of the revenue budget.
Yep.
And given that the Chief Constable has been really, really clear about how little room for manoeuvre there is given the constraints of the uplift budget funding and so on, that extra 1.8% is actually it's a larger percent of a smaller chunk of the budget. Yes. It's kind of where you've got that flexibility. So in other words, it's quite a big squeeze by the looks of it.
It is, yeah, and actually that's why we need to look to obviously get the scheme completed as quickly as we can, because the longer delays will obviously impact on our ability to reduce that burden longer term. So there are some implications, there are some risks. But I would say actually, as it stands at the moment, these figures are built into the medium-term financial strategy, so it's a sustainable position as it stands today.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ali.
Thank you very much. I mean, at the last meeting, Chair, we discussed an increase of council tax, and I'm finding it very difficult, when I go out and meet the people I represent, that we as the local authority, we're going to be increasing council tax by 5%. And sadly, a lot of the issues, basically, fly tipping, litter, services are being reduced. And we spoke earlier in terms of people not getting the response from the police. And, the issue is, and someone raised this with me the other day, that what percentage, what amount of our 1% is going to be used to basically sustain or hopefully improve the services they get? Or is it going to be, as Councillor Lynn said, used our future generations to pay the debt back, basically? So I think, as the wise man said once, that when you borrow money, it needs to be paid back, basically. And my father always said, borrowing, regardless of what the interest rate is, it's not always the best thing. Live within your own means. But I'm a bit concerned that we are reducing services to our public, our residents, and at the same time we're borrowing money. Although I appreciate Matthew saying that it's sustainable and we are not as bad as some other local authorities. But I think despite that, I worry about the debts incurred by all public sector organisations, whether it's our Peterborough City Council or our constabulary. Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just come in there? As you know, we do have internal and external audits. And from those audit reports, which you have seen, this is regarded as very, very low risk. And we are a very low risk force with finances. So they had no reason to worry about this on their accounts. And they are the professionals. So I tend to accept what they say.
Thank you. Councillor Bywater.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Just want to come back in relation to that risk. The Commissioner's talked about the low risk factor. Yes, there are financial risks. It's something that we're doing in the fire service in relation to how we're going to do the new headquarters in the fire service. And ultimately with Parkside, there's a resale cost here that we can draw back on. Okay, so that in itself gives us a bit of an insurance policy here because it's a prime site in the centre of Cambridgeshire. However, there are also operational risks here because if we don't modernise our infrastructure and our capital programmes like the new police station, we run the risk that our force won't be able to deliver on its investigations. And I talk about Parkside. It was built, in the 1950s? We have massively different investigation techniques within the police now. We're talking about forensic exhibits, drying rooms, interview rooms, detention and custody to make investigations much easier and swifter for officers not having to travel miles for custody and detention. So we have to offset these capital risks alongside our risks for modernising the force and bringing the force up to speed and up to date. And I think this is a risk that we've got to take on the chin, and I think we've got to stick to our morals. And I support the way that this is going. So thank you.
Can I just say that I agree with you. If we don't modernise, then we don't provide that evidence that courts are now requiring. So therefore, you'll not end up with as many prosecutions that are successful. So HMIC FRS will be inspecting. And at the moment, we're being given leeway to know that this plan is in place, but it wouldn't last much longer if we didn't take this forward. And actually, the force would come under some real pressure. What you've got to remember is that I and my colleagues who were my predecessors, we actually ended up with a very old lot of buildings that need to be brought up to the new standard that is required. So this is what's happening. It's not something that is somebody's little baby that they want. This is an operational requirement that we need to be able to, as Councillor Bywater says, to meet the standards of investigations and provide the evidence to courts, and to actually provide our witnesses and victims with a service as well, to make sure that they are no longer victims and left with people not being prosecuted properly. So for me, it's an all-round issue that we need to get underway and do as fast as we can. Thank you.
Chairman, can I just come back on that? There was a point I just want to make in relation to the working environment for our staff as well. That's just as important as the criminal investigations and all the other processes that take place within a police station. And I think it's crucial that, you know, our staff have got the best places and the best facilities to work in.
I would really agree with you. If the staff are not well looked after, you don't look after their welfare, then they're not going to perform as well as you expect and as well as they need to. So we have to look after their health and welfare as well, and that does include the places where they work. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. I think the balance here is that it's okay to spend this money, but it's important to also make sure that our communities are seeing that by spending this money, they are getting an improvement in service, and they are seeing a reduction in crime, and they are seeing a better and stronger police force. So if that's what happens from this, I'm sure the general populace are happy to pay for their police. But I think that that is what we need to bear in mind, is that where the police is concerned, whatever money is put into it, it must be shown to be improving the outcomes, sort of thing, or what the public is getting for that.
Indeed, thank you. I had just one couple of other small points of clarification. So going back to table 5.2, there's a line of interest and investment income, which is some significant. I just wondered if you could provide a little bit of detail about what comprises, what that consists of.
So that's on the reserves that we hold. So where we do hold cash reserves, they're not massive, but we invest them, and you can see 114,000 generally over the term. It's obviously quite small on the in terms of less than 1% on the millions that we do hold at the moment. But obviously some of those we'll be looking to use to fund other projects as we move forward. So it will diminish over time as well.
All right, thank you. And the final question is about the £10 million loan, which is to be repaid at the end in 2046, 47.
Yep.
Could you explain why that was deemed appropriate for that particular loan to be scheduled in that way?
Yeah, so what we tend to do with any loan, whether it's an annuity loan or a maturity loan, is look at what it's going to be funding. So generally, we try and apply the debt to the actual asset, and this debt was taken very early on in the South Police, for the Southern Police Station. We thought we'd be moving ahead a lot further and faster than we have done, unfortunately. So that was the rationale for us taking that and saying, actually, the station should last 50 years. It's got a 50-year life, at least, hopefully. Hence the reason why we pushed it out to that sort of time.
Okay, thank you.
40 years, sorry. Yep.
Are there any further questions? Are there any recommendations that members would like to make on this item? So is the panel happy to note the report? Okay, so thank you very much. So then moving on to agenda item number 9, which is the report on roads policing. Acting Commissioner, I don't know if you want to introduce this.
Same as the other ones. I'm presuming everybody's read the report. You've got the information in front of you, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you, Acting Commissioner. So let's start with Councillor Daunton.
Thank you, Chairman. So I'm looking at 7.6, which is on page 34. I'm glad to see that there's been a new look at the Vision Zero partnership, because I don't think it landed very clearly when it was first launched. But if we look at what's said in 7.6, the structure also formalises the relationship with the people of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough in line with the principles of Think Communities. I'm not actually sure what that means and what that relationship is with the people of Cambridge and Peterborough and Think Communities, whatever that is, aiming to empower and work with local communities. So if you could just unpick that a bit. That's my first point. And my second point really is to do with the road policing unit. And I know that tackling serious accidents and deaths is very important, but to our communities, speeding and parking and those sort of daily occurrences, which don't necessarily lead to serious injury or death, those incidents are also very important. And how can the police work through this partnership, through Vision Zero, more closely with local communities? What does that actually mean? I think I'd just like you to put a bit more detail onto 7.6.
Thank you. Working with the public, it's basically working with partnerships. So we do have councils, we have highways and other people that we work with, but it's also working with the people who go out and do speed watch and allowing them to take some responsibility for their areas. And that's thinking about communities. There's been a lot of money over the last few years put into speed watch, equipment bought so that they don't have to share too often, because it's amazing how much when you see that speeding in various villages, and I've been out with speed watchers, where the actual people caught speeding are the people who live there. And by raising the fact that you've got a speed watch and you've seen your speed and you end up with a letter from the police, I think it's bringing the locals into it's their village, but you know, it doesn't allow them to speed through, and a lot of them do. But it's more than that. It's more about making sure that everybody understands the dangers of speeding, of drink driving, of drug driving, and everything else. And it's not just speeding on dual carriageways and motorways. It's on the back roads around our county, where we've got villages and small minor roads where people think it's okay to speed, where the police, if they are there, they will catch you. But it's working together with the public. And if people do see something that is happening where the speeding is going on, that they do inform the police. And if there's enough, we can get the councils, we can get highways and everybody else into maybe traffic calming systems coming into villages. So it's working with the public throughout. And I think that's the way that needs to go. But Vision Zero is not only about local, it's about national and as well. So working to standards that are national and international standards. And it's making sure that we're using best practice moving forward. I chaired that meeting and I took over the chair for a while, and we brought it up to Vision Zero, and then I stepped aside. We've now put somebody in who's taken it even further, and it's using technology, it's using stuff that's coming out of universities, and it's also local people who are saying, this is what's happening in our area. And we've got to work with people who make vehicles as well, because it's not just people driving vehicles, it's technology as well now that is coming in to actually hopefully make our roads safer. And so it's working with everybody as a partnership. So the people out there in the community are involved in this if they wish to be.
Chairman, could I just come back on that, please? Would it be possible then for this panel to have regular updates on the effectiveness of Vision Zero, and perhaps some statistics and some narrative along with the statistics on a regular basis?
it's up for the panel to decide what reports they want to come. So that's for you to decide. Thank you.
Well, Chairman, please, if we could do that then.
Yes, I think we need to look to see what the Vision Zero partnership will, what their reporting mechanism will be in any case, because if the reports are going into the public domain, then we can obviously pick those up. But so I think we will need to monitor it. But yes, I'll add a recommendation that we want to keep a tab on progress with the Vision Zero and how that's being monitored.
Thank you.
Councillor Massey.
Thank you, and thank you, Acting Commissioner. I know that road safety is a passion of yours, so thank you. It's also a passion of mine. I want to talk a little bit about the fact that we do need to be looking at near miss data as well. I know that Vision Zero looks at accident data, but we need to be looking at those near misses, because those near misses are where the next accident can be. And I totally agree with the comment on 6.6, where it says enforcement action alone is not an appropriate or sustainable way to change behaviour and improve safety of our roads. Part of that reason, you build a long straight road, people will use it as a racetrack. It's just a fact. So we do need to be looking at how the impact of the design on our roads has on the driving and the safety element of how safe those are. And we can say a lot more about that in regards to what happened in Waterbeach recently in January, the sad case where the van hit the pram and a baby boy died. I do understand that work has been going on actually, and that area is going to be made safe. But the fact is, we shouldn't be acting after a fatality. We don't want fatalities, and we don't want accidents, any accidents, whether they're serious or not. And so my pushback really is, we need to see more output from Vision Zero. And the previous tagline with Vision Zero was that by 2030, we won't have any fatalities or serious accidents on our roads. We need to be thinking about getting rid of that date, saying this is Vision Zero, and we want to get that down to zero as fast as we can. This isn't about an issue about climate change, where we do need to have these incremental steps in order to push ahead to make change. This is about lives. Thank you.
Thank you, and you're quite correct. It is a passion of mine, and I'm glad it's your passion as well, because we have far too many people killed on roads. If you put up all the people that are killed on roads against a pandemic, there would be more action taken, and I want to see more action taken as we move forward. For me, and it is very sad, the incident that you're talking about, and I don't want to talk about any incident individually, but we have on that particular road plans which are coming through via highways and also the combined authority. So hopefully that will happen. And yes, I would love to see when they're now designing roads, that the engineering of those roads is taken, speeding and everything else is taken into account to make them safer. And this is why I'm saying it's not just police. You can't. It's about education. It's about going into schools and with one of the officers actually doing some of the work that they do at the moment, talking to people who are about that age coming to drive and people who've just got the driving licenses. I actually put something to the government not too long ago with an idea of how to make sure that people who pass the driving test, you don't become a driver after you pass your driving test. It takes years and it's learning. And if there's anything that I have understood in my time is it takes years to learn to drive and to be aware of everything that's around you. So I would love to see, what I put forward is a progressive driving license, but also when you pass your test, that you still have another, maybe a new driver sticker on, whatever. It's not just the P sticker, just passed, something that is legally required. I would love to see something like that on, and that they will then be noted by everybody around that they are new people out driving. Give them the extra room. But yeah, there's lots of things that I would like to see, but it takes the drivers as well, and it's education and all our partners to be involved to make sure that we have got safer roads and safer vehicles as well.
Thank you. Councillor Sharp.
Thank you, Chairman. A couple of points. I'll pick up on the speeding. I represent 10 villages and communities in all the villages south of Newmarket that are in Cambridgeshire, and speeding is an issue in every one. But the issues are different because the layout, none of those villages are the same. They're all laid out differently. Certainly what we've been pushing to do is try and get some work done through the local highways initiative scheme through county. So obviously that, you know, I would say, because each district, as I understand it, the pot is divided up across each district and therefore the county, and obviously it doesn't affect Peterborough because that's funded differently. But certainly I would encourage people to, you know, get their villages on whatever to put bids in to get that sorted. And it is, as Ray says, it's about education, I suppose. And if that doesn't work, we've got to put more drastic enforcement in place. I mean, the village when I wander around with the dog quite often, I'm used to just waving at people when I think they're doing more than 30. And now I notice that people actually, when they see me, they actually slow down. So it's, you know, it's about sort of getting the message out there. The second point is one that I'm afraid disagree with the recommendation. It's in respect of the civil enforcement areas. East Cambs, we did a lot of work at the back end of last year, taking a detailed look into the issue, and we want to address those on-street parking enforcement issues. But what we've agreed to do is implement the CSAS, the Community Safety Accreditation Scheme, and use the powers under Section 38 of the Police and Crime Act 2017. I understand officers have been discussing with the Chief Constable that who, as far as I'm being told, is sort of not against us offering that approach. It's just a different way of doing things, but we feel it's more cost effective. Hopefully we want to get to the same result. It's just a different way of doing it. Thank you.
Sorry, it is the chief that orders those powers to be allowed, but personally, I think as regards parking, if an officer sees something that is, you know, kind of dangerous, I would hope that they take action. But that is for the chief to allow those powers to be given. And I would ask all councils to look at that, because it may be a way of coming together as 2 or 3 councils to make sure you've got people out there enforcing parking. But again, as you say, it is education. It is making speeding the same as drink driving when they came to that, and seat belts. It's having the right campaigns out there to make sure that people, it's not you know, a laugh. It's actually, public don't like it. Public will attack you verbally, whatever, or, you know, the authorities will make sure. What I don't see at the moment is all the partners being able to get that message out, how dangerous it is, and the effect that a death or a serious injury has, and not just on that family, but the people around, people where it lives. It does affect them. So for me, I agree, speeding is something that we need to tackle. And if I can, I would love to be able to take this forward in another guise in the years to come.
Can I come back briefly? I agree totally with you, Ray. And yes, you've got to be careful, because I certainly had people stop in the village, and because I've waved them down, and one chap, I can remember, said, well, I was only doing 35. And I said, well, you've admitted it then, haven't you? And he got in his car and drove off. So it's just about education, I think, and we just got to keep ramming the message forward, because, you know, obviously I'm not as close from a geographical point to the case at Waterbeach, but obviously that was a very sad case, and if we can stop just one of those by enforcing it, that's one life that's been saved. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would actually agree that if we can get down to zero sooner, then we do it as soon as possible. We get down and we educate, we put in the right road structures, make sure they're designed correctly, so that we get to that zero target.
Thank you. Councillor Massey.
Thank you. A couple more comments, and then I've also got a question that I forgot that I'd scribbled down as well. So yes, I totally agree. We also need to look at 20-mile-an-hour zones and the implementation of those, and not necessarily how they can be policed, because we can't keep throwing things back at enforcement, but how we can use those 20-mile-an-hour zones in a better way to slow down cars. So if you've got a 20-mile-an-hour zone, that road should be designed so that you can't speed, because it's there because it's in a residential street. So that's one part that we need to look at. And I totally agree. Love to talk to you afterwards, Ray. Yes, there are many interventions. The local highways initiatives are one, but they take forever because it's only open once a year, and then it takes a while for them to become implemented. And so if something is needed now, we need to be able to get on with it and do it. So it's about noting where those issues are and where those high priority issues are to go forward with that, like what has happened in Water Beach. But different things, initiatives doesn't have to be cost lots and lots of money. It's all about signage and images and different things that you can do, road layouts, road design, road surface, about giving that feedback, even, to the drivers to say, hey, slow down. We see it all across Europe, for instance. And, in India, I think they put pictures of cutouts of police officers at places, and they keep moving them around so that people in the corner of the eye think, oh, the police better stop and slow down and behave. Things like that could be implemented in places to basically affect the driver, to make them think and slow down, which is really important. So I do think speeding is important, of course, but also dangerous driving, because some people just drive really, really dangerously, and they're the ones that we need our police to be enforcing, really. And we need, speeding to be enforced in another way. That doesn't mean that it takes up all the police's time too. I've got a question on page 34, 7.7, and you're talking about the Casualty Reduction Fund. And about how monies from the fund are linked to progression of the strategy and Vision Zero approach. So my question is, how much is that pot? And can you give an example of how it's been spent?
Thank you. Actually, we've got a casualty reduction officer, but it's all about education. It's all about going into schools and colleges and public arenas. And that's what the Casualty Reduction Officer does, and looks at the education of pupils. As I said earlier on, this is what it does. It teaches, hopefully, through a system that they have. But I can give you Nikki to answer the financial question. But it's for me, it's making sure that we do as much as possible as in the education front before people get into a car and shortly afterwards. But Nikki, could you come in with some of that funding question?
Hi, thank you, Ray. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Brilliant, thank you. So Nikki, the actual fund varies every year. It's actually the proceeds of speed enforcement courses. It's the excess money that comes back from that. So the actual fund varies every single year. But the rules are that it could actually only be used for educational activities and prevention rather than the enforcement. So we have a range of things that are funded each year through that. I think the Acting Commissioner described the casualty reduction post that's within the constabulary. We're funding a lot of the Vision Zero work and also local speed enforcement, not speed enforcement, but speed education activities. One of the other things that we also fund from that pot is an amazing charity locally called the Road Victims Trust that supports the families who have been bereaved by road traffic collisions. And there's also some sort of really low-level projects to do with cycling safety and things like that. But the Vision Zero Partnership have an oversight of a small amount of that fund, and what they do is allocate that money out according to the evidence base. Does that answer the question?
That is very helpful, yes. Does that mean that it doesn't, I mean, my concern with that is the impact of lockdowns and COVID on that fund then?
Sorry, say that again, sorry.
I said because of the impact of lockdown and COVID, I do wonder whether that is going to impact on the fund for next year.
Absolutely, it could do, yeah, and we won't know that until nearer the end of this actual financial year. That's what I mean, the funding does go up and down.
Thank you. Councillor Daunton.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. So it would be really helpful to have some more information about the way in which the people involved in Vision Zero work together with county offices on local highway initiatives. I mean, Councillor Sharp has just spoken about that, and I know that they're important ways of funding safety infrastructure or speeding infrastructure, but as Councillor Massey pointed out, they can be very cumbersome and take a long time to put into effect. And I just wonder where Vision Zero staff come into those decisions on local highway initiatives, and whether that could be speeded up or strengthened in any way, given the relaunch of Vision Zero. That's my question. And then I've just got a comment on civil enforcement areas and what's written here at 8.1. that East Cambs, Fenland, Huntingdon and South Cambs are 4 of the 9 areas nationally not currently designated as CEAs. And the comment is that the GCP, the Greater Cambridge Partnership, is looking at funding of CEAs, because the difficulty if you're outside a city area is the infrastructure needed, the funding for the infrastructure needed for civil parking enforcement. So that's just a comment, an update on that point.
Thank you. I think we've already mentioned that if you want any information, but what I have to say is Vision Zero is in its infancy. It is working really hard with all our partners, but the information will be available hopefully in the not too near future, exactly what it's doing. But I did have a meeting with the member that's running this recently, and there's some really good stuff that's being worked on with all the partners. So hopefully we'll see some great results coming forward in the not too distant future. But thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bywater.
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. Just a point in relation to the civil enforcement areas in the report, just to make you aware as a panel that Huntingdon District Council Cabinet agreed in February that they're going to assume taking on the parking enforcement of on-street parking for yellow line offences. They're currently working with Cambridgeshire County Council to submit an application to the Department of Transport in relation to that. So it's very much on Huntingdon District Council's radar, and we'd be more than welcome to work with the police in relation to that, and look forward to it, because Huntingdonshire residents, in particular our rural residents, can see the pressures on the police, but we do need enforcement when it comes to contravening yellow lines in the district. So just a point of clarity.
Thank you, that's useful. Councillor Tierney.
Yeah, I just wanted to add to that, actually. Fenland District Council are also looking at how we can decriminalise parking and take on some of the parking responsibilities. I did notice another councillor mentioned the concerns about this causing problems with paid parking. Well, we're determined to not let that happen and to actually be able to implement a policy that allows us to continue with paid parking. So that can be done, and we're happy to work with anyone. I think if anybody would like any guidance on this, you could speak to our councillor Jan French, who's leading on it here in Finland.
Thank you, that's very helpful, thank you. So it does strike me that maybe it would be useful if Councillor Sharp could arrange for the sort of pros and cons that were considered between civil enforcement and the the alternative, the community, what are they called? Community Safety Accreditation Scheme, because I think that clearly is it would be useful to understand what the pros and cons of those two options are for districts to make final decisions on how to proceed. I think it's also worth adding that the government has indicated most recently in the bus Back Better report that it intends to commence the remaining elements of Part 6 of the Traffic Management Act, which will allow civil enforcement officers to enforce moving offences, which include restricted turns and also restricted access, so weight limits, time limits, which at the moment would the police would have to enforce, but it's very rare that they will deem that there's a safety issue. It's more of a matter for residents' peace of mind. So I think that there's definitely an advantage in being able to enforce those, as well as also to be able to enforce new yellow lines that I think lots of villages particularly have asked for. So for yellow lines to control parking, but it's felt that without enforcement, it's pointless. So I think there may be new opportunities with civil enforcement in that respect. Acting Commissioner, I wonder if you could just if you could answer the question, who at the moment is chairing Vision Zero, the strategic board? You say you've obviously stepped down.
Sorry, I've just forgot his name. I was trying to do that. Maybe I could ask one of the officers if you just hold on a second. Yeah, sorry, it's Matt Stanton.
I know. Who does he represent?
He's a project manager.
So he's been employed specifically for this project. I mean, is he the county council? Or?
Richard Lumley is the chair.
Richard Lumley is the chair, right? Okay. So in other words, the county council is the lead on this.
Yes.
Okay. So I'm just thinking, in a sense, the panel scrutinising the commissioner on Vision Zero is somewhat indirect. I mean, obviously, we need to understand that the commissioner is holding, well, in the paper it says holding Vision Zero to account through its representative, but I'm mindful that that's a fairly indirect form of scrutiny on a very important piece of work. So perhaps if perhaps in a future meeting we could have a little bit more detail about how the commissioner is holding the board to account and particularly measuring performance, because we need to understand that this is effective in reducing people killed and seriously injured on the roads, well, and also reducing near misses, as Councillor Massey said. So I think we perhaps need a little more clarity on that in some point in the future.
Thank you. You can put request in for that at future papers, but on that panel, you do have, on the Vision Zero panel, members of each area within the county. So you do have council representatives who can actually relay that back to the councillors who are on the panel here as well.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you.
Can I just make a point as well? Richard Lumley, who is the Assistant Director of Highways, is it's quite important, I guess, to be that chair. Is linking into highways, so I'm quite pleased with that.
Yeah, yes. I'm pleased with that too, I must admit.
Councillor Daunton.
No, sorry.
All right. Oh, okay. So, are there any other points or questions on this? So, I think we possibly have some recommendations to make on this. So, I think we're essentially, as a panel, we're looking for regular updates on progress on Vision Zero and how the Commissioner is monitoring this. So, I think we'll make that. Can make that as a recommendation, and I think we're amending the recommendation to the panel about initiating conversations, which is clear that conversations have already been initiated and in fact are well advanced. So I think it's just a matter of members getting up to speed with where their particular district is in those conversations around civil enforcement or community safety accreditation scheme powers. So just on the recommendation for future updates, could I just have a seconder for that? Councillor Bywater, thank you. Anyone not supporting making that recommendation? Okay, thank you. So otherwise, is the panel happy to note the report? Thank you. So then we move on to item 10, decisions by the Acting Police and Crime Commissioner. Unless Acting Commissioner, there was any particular item you wanted to highlight?
No, I think the things that are mentioned on there are all as important. They are decisions, so thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Bywater.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Just to comment, to thank the Police and Crime Commission in relation to the funding for the SAFE project. Having been very close to it, it's very successful. So just want to put that on record publicly to say thank you very much. It's welcomed. So there, thank you.
Yeah, I thought it was very important too. That's why I was more than happy to do that.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions about any of the decisions? So are members happy to note that report? Okay, thank you. So that concludes the main business of the panel. I would just like to thank on behalf of the panel and indeed of the general public of Cambridgeshire and Peterborough in general, to you, Acting Commissioner, for stepping up and taking on the responsibilities of Commissioner. It was meant to be for just under 6 months. It has ended up being 18 months, and with a global pandemic thrown in for good measure. So I don't think anyone outside of the OPCC can really know just how demanding the job has been for you. So it's a huge thank you from us and from the community for all of your time, effort, commitment, and dedication. It is really greatly appreciated.
Thank you for that. And I did ask at the beginning if I could actually do my reflections on my role, if that's still okay, please.
Absolutely, of course, please.
Thank you. So I hope this is not too long-winded for you, but the job of the Commissioner is to resource the constabulary and to hold the Chief Constable's account for running an effective and efficient constabulary. I've been responsible for setting up the precept on 2 occasions, and as you say, it's not always. I am a member of the public as well. I have to pay and understand my residents in my ward as a councillor as well have to pay this. So on both occasions, I raised the precept to the maximum that was allowed. And I won't go into the reasons now why that happened, why I did that, but suffice to say that I could not, in all good conscience, leave office having done otherwise. I know that particularly during the COVID, this wouldn't have been welcomed by many, but the responses to my surveys have endorsed this. So I inherited, as we already said about the estate, an ageing estate, and together with other national programmes placed a significant capital burden which ultimately will need to be paid for out of revenue. A huge success that I'm not claiming credit for, although I did have some hand in it, a little hand, but it's the granting of permission, the planning permission for the new police station at Milton. This has been needed for many years and is going forward to be a reality, and I'm really pleased about that, and I'm pleased that the panel understand the reason for it. I'm leaving office knowing that we have a Chief Constable with the resources he needs to keep people safe, and that I have not made a short-term political expedient decisions moving forward, but I have left ones that would have left the constabulary in a poor state. If I'd have done that, I've made long-term decisions. Before I move on to other matters, I would like to thank the Chief Constable. We are blessed in Cambridgeshire and Peterborough to have an outstanding Chief Constable. He has, with his team, achieved excellent results, and I look forward to seeing the next HMIC FRS grading of the Constabulary. He has already moved the organisation from a required improvement to good, and I strongly believe, personally, that they are about outstanding now. And this is not by chance, but through a team of highly capable and dedicated leaders that we have within our officer team and the staff within the Constabulary. Throughout the response to COVID, I have supported victims, bringing extra funding and allocation to the range of services providers. We led a bid for the Safer Streets funding, bringing in nearly 550,000 to the county to make homes safer from burglaries. Road safety, as we've just discussed, has always been a passion of mine. I've chaired the County Road Safety Partnership previously, and that has now been transformed into the Vision Zero Partnership with the programme lead funded from my Casualty Reduction Fund. I would say that no commissioner wants to take up their post and find an office in disarray. I took over under very difficult circumstances. Now, the office wasn't in disarray, but due to the circumstances, it was a hugely challenging time, given the resignation of the previous PCC, followed by a general election. And that, in turn, delayed the precept. I then thought it would be holding the office for a few months, but I was wrong. Due to COVID, a further year, as you have already mentioned, I've been holding it, moving it to 18 months. Whoever takes over from me will find a very lean and effective office. I cannot claim the credit for this, as it's a testament to the whole of the staff that are in there. They do a fantastic job. I'm sure that I would have been blamed if it hadn't been the case, but my personal style has been to acknowledge that as a politician, I do not know all the answers. And as a politician, I need to rely on the professional staff for advice that works out how they get there. And this is something that I would urge whoever becomes the next commissioner to do likewise, because you have a fantastic staff there, and I would like to thank every member of the staff that is in my office as well. They have worked really hard and supported me in every facet of this job and outside the job as well. As I said, I never expected to be taking office. I never expected for it to be extended for a further year. Arguably one of the most challenging years with COVID impacting on the organisation. But I think my reflection for the panel, and said in the interest of the next commissioner, is that I'd like to see a more supportive relationship. I know that the panel have a challenging role, but all the LGA guidance stresses that it is a supporting role as well as challenge. It might be helpful for the panel to reflect on how you support the role and how you exercise that support in the future. At the start of COVID, the OPCC released staff to support the constabulary directly in various roles, from full-time specials, support up to the county COVID intelligence cell, supporting the victims and witness hub, and of course, my chief executive, Dorothy Gregson, who was released to public health and actually took a job there permanent. And we had Jim, who stepped forward, the same as I did, for over 10 months to fulfill that job. So I want to thank him personally. He's brought a lot to this office, and having now been appointed, I see him bringing even more. Bearing in mind, there was at that time only about 14 members in my office, in staff terms. It was done in the expectation that we would experience proportionate governance from the panel. Funding, it's been known for years that we receive one of the lowest amounts from the government. I lobbied on that as our previous commissioners. I would like to see the panel members to actually add their voice and their strength behind that, not just for the police, but also for our partners. A clearer plan of areas of interest would be really helpful for panel sessions. If you could do a yearly plan on the things that you are wanting to bring forward as a main topic of each panel meeting and look at the outcomes. And I would ask you all to consider, when you bring forward your requests for reports, those reports take time, and it takes effort from not only my staff, but from police staff and police officers. And that again is putting pressure on the officers and the staff. So before requesting any kind of report, I would just ask you to say to yourselves, what are we looking for out of this report? How does this relate to our remit? And are we putting extra stress on the partnership of the OPCC, the police and the police staff? But I'd like to thank the panel. Their job is to support and to hold me to account. This is the last one that you'll see me or hear of me in this role as in front of the panel. I'd like to thank every member of the panel for their hard work. I know how challenging it is, having been on the panel, and wish you all the best in whatever you do in the future. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Acting Commissioner. And yes, I'd also echo all of your thanks to the Chief Constable and his officers and staff, and to your own officers who have all done a sterling job through extraordinarily difficult times. So yes, it has been a team effort. And your points to the panel about supporting the panel, so supporting the Commissioner and being mindful about what we request in terms of reports and the burden that places on the OPCC. I am very mindful of that, and we do need to think carefully about that. And I think as we emerge from the pandemic and the rather ad hoc arrangements that we've had to come up with during that time, you're absolutely right, we need a longer term plan on what we want. So thank you indeed for all of that.
Thank you very much. It has been a privilege to be in this position, not a planned one, as you know, but it has been a privilege, and I look on this time as not only challenging, but it's been a great privilege. Thank you. And I'll now leave the meeting.
Well, just before you do, I just want to mention that we will also be saying goodbye to Councillor Shellens, who is standing down at the next election in May. He has actually served on the panel more or less continuously since it was formed almost 10 years ago now. And the panel will lose the most experienced, most widely experienced member, as well as a very diligent member. And you will be greatly missed, and so will your dry sense of humour be missed. So thank you on behalf of all of the panel and all of our support officers for all of your contributions, Mike. It's been greatly appreciated.
I'd like to add my thanks to him as well.
So that is the conclusion of the part of the meeting where we need you, Acting Commissioner. So thank you for attending, and thank you for all of your staff for contributing and supporting.
Thank you. I am now leaving.
So now just moving to the final parts of the agenda, item 11. This is the Police and Crime Panel's subscription to the Eastern Network, which is managed by Frontline. So in the agenda pack was an outline of what the network provides in terms of support. I have attended all the meetings and Councillor Sharp has also attended some of the meetings with me. I think it is useful. I think it is important that we maintain contacts with particularly the BCH, the Bedfordshire and Hertfordshire partners in the collaboration, and that we understand what their commissions are doing and to triangulate, if you like, our questioning and understanding what's going on. So personally, I think there is value in this, and so I would recommend supporting it. Do any members have any questions or thoughts on it? I'm not seeing any hands, so can I put it to the panel that we will support, the panel supports renewal of membership of the network at a cost of £400, is it? Yes. So if anyone dissents, could you please indicate? No dissent. Okay, thank you. So moving on then to item 12. Could I call on Claire to provide a verbal update on the task and finish group?
You certainly can. Thank you very much. Panel members will be aware that we set up a task and finish group to undertake a scrutiny review of the work of the panel, and we work with the Centre, or are working with the Centre for Governance and Scrutiny. In order to do that, the task and finish group met with Ian Parry, who's the lead for that organisation, on the 15th of March, and we received a presentation at that point in time and an overview of his sort of preliminary findings. So he went through the scope and the process, the methodology, and then started to draw out his preliminary findings around ideas for areas to improve and strengthen the work of the panel. So the task and finish group at the moment are in the process. We've shared that information. We are in the process of picking a number of key themes out of his wider areas for improving and strengthening, with a view to giving those key themes back to Ian to then write a full report with some very clear recommendations as how we might carry those key themes forward. That will come back to the task and finish group. We're hoping by the end of April, to allow the task and finish group to meet in some depth to go through those, to then be able to bring our final recommendations as a task and finish group back to the full panel at the June meeting.
Thank you, Claire. Do any members have any questions for Claire about the task and finish group? Claire, do we have it? Would you be able to share any sort of preliminary thoughts with panelists before the election? I'm just sort of mindful that it would be quite useful for me as chair to sort of have in mind some ideas about what direction we might be going in, particularly in light of the points that Ray was making about the resources that we demand from the OPCC and having a longer term plan on what we want to scrutinise. So
some of the indicative areas, like I say, I think it's, the task and finish group need to polish these and perhaps have 4 or 5 themes that they want to carry forward, but kind of broadly areas for improvement. So it's acknowledged that there will, we're at a good point in time to develop a new relationship with a new incoming PCC and share some idea of understanding of how we want to develop things moving forward. There were some themes, and it's interesting to note what the acting commissioner just said about having an annual plan. Perhaps there were some themes around greater collaboration with the OPCC in terms of work planning, agenda focus. There was a view around, bearing in mind Ian, I think, has interviewed every panel member to get their kind of feedback and ideas and understandings. So I think there was we need to really perhaps think and focus on on our real core business, which is about holding the Commissioner to account for the delivery of the police and crime plan, and thinking about perhaps some more focused, sharper ways of actually doing that. There is a theme in there, and I think it's likely perhaps to be a theme that certainly the Task and Finish group will pick up and drive forward, is about the panel kind of owning and driving the agenda. I think there's a sense currently that sort of we get information that's been prepared perhaps for the Business Coordination Board or for other areas, and it comes to us and we sort of pick over it. I think there is a feeling that actually the panel ought to own that agenda, drive that agenda, and yes, think very carefully about the amount of information, the type and style of information, and how we want it presented, bearing in mind ultimately it's for a wider public audience as well, but that actually the panel kind of need to drive that in a way that perhaps we haven't done as clearly as we might do. And then there's a theme about developing our own core knowledge and understanding, and thinking about how we might source and or commission perhaps independent research or independent information. So if we are following a particular theme, subject, content, you know, perhaps we need to look wider than our own constabulary and think about where we draw the sources of information. So maybe you can do a bit of compare and contrast, that sort of work. And then there was perhaps a suggestion around raising the profile in terms of a communication strategy around the work of the panel for the public. And I think actually we've seen some pretty good examples of that today in terms of how papers that come to us that we have now questioned and have a better understanding. I'm thinking particularly about the non-crime reporting, if you like, or workloads, that actually we need to think about sharper communications for a wider public audience.
Thank you, that's useful. Just maybe to add into that, or at least
Edward, though, with the Task and Finish group, it's up to them now. They have to work on this, so anything they have to make the recommendations on what comes back from Ian, and then bring their recommendations back to the panel. So it's not for the panel to make any recommendations to them. This is their project, and they're the ones that will come back to you guys with their recommendations. So it's just for them to deal with and then bring back to you guys.
Yeah, well, I'll rephrase the start of my question. I think we need to be mindful of what the Commissioner was saying about how the panel supports the Commissioner. That he was obviously feeling that we were only scrutinising and not supporting, or that the balance was wrong on that. And I do think that we as a panel need to think how we can be supportive, and there are ways in which we can be a sounding board and can provide advice if we're asked. It's quite hard to provide that if we're not asked. But there must be ways in which panels can be constructive in the way they support a commissioner, which clearly is an issue in terms of having a good relationship. It's not purely adversarial.
No, and I think we are very mindful of that. If we focus on our core task, which is actually to hold the commissioner to account, that is, credit where it's due, but it is also asking those questions and clarification, as well as drilling down to some of those other areas. So I think this afternoon's meetings, it's been particularly around, if you take the example of the 80-20 split, the work around that we've done collectively this afternoon is actually saying we want this information because we do want to be supportive, and we can't be supportive unless we understand the context of that particular piece of work. So accountability for me comes in the shape of support and challenge.
Chairman, if I may rudely interrupt, I have another meeting I've got to go to, so I need to bid you all farewell. It's been fun at times. A particular thanks to Jane and to Paulina, and also to you, Edward. I think you've been a very calm and reasonable chairman under a certain amount of provocation, only some of which was provided by me. So I wish you all well, and I shall watch future developments with great interest, but from the sidelines. Thank you.
Take care.
Thank you,
Mike.
Yeah.
Can I make Councillor Massey?
Yeah. So my thoughts on what Ray said. Yes, we do want to be mindful. We don't want to overload things. However, if we're asking questions or we're asking for them to bring back a report, it's because there's concerns and we want to scrutinise. So, but although we have to be mindful, I would urge the panel to still make sure that you're asking questions that you want to ask, because the whole time we've asked them for reports, it's because there's been a concern of something. And so as much as I appreciate Ray's thoughts on that, I also have to push back to say that is the panel's role, actually, is to be able to scrutinise it. And so therefore we should be able to ask for that data. In regards to the panel's relationship with the Police and Crime Commission, I think it's an interesting one. And I think the issue that we've had in the past is exactly what Claire just said, is that we get papers retrospectively anyway. So we're commenting on something that's already been decided by the business board. So we can't do anything about it or have our voice. And let's face it, every time that we have commented on draft papers that have come to us or draft reports, and we said, actually, we don't like the layout, we don't like the wording, we don't like this, we keep going back and being told, well, thank you for your comments, but tough, it's staying like that, so never mind, despite the fact that we're saying actually general public aren't going to understand it. So it is about needing to have that relationship. It's two-way. And I think it is also about having, I mean, the panel is a good cross-section of the county, really. And so you guys know, we all know our areas better. And so we should be able to offer advice and also suggestions to the Commissioner. And in the past, we haven't, well, in fact, we have tried. Don't forget, 3 years ago, I tried to ask Jason Aberwhite for the data about how many times do you have to take calls that are for other partners, and was shut down. And so maybe that's where the issue lay in the past, is that we were used to being told no shush, no shush, no shush. And so going forward, I think maybe with the new Commissioner, when they start, it's about the panel putting forward, you know, this is what we would like it to be, and having that narrative with the new Commissioner and hoping that the best foot can be put forward.
Sorry, Councillor Lynn.
Thanks, Chair. I think it's really important that we remember that we are elected to represent the people and to make sure that they are getting the best possible service for what they're paying for. So I think that is where our loyalties have to be first and foremost. Although, you know, maybe when we see that something that is good come from them and that we all agree with, maybe we should note that and be more emphasize that more. But as for anything else, I think it's very important that we make sure that we are representing our communities the best that we can. We are asking the questions that need to be answered, and we are getting the best clarification for them. And to be fair, I think that was proved today when we brought up about the 80-20%, and that clarification that was given to us by Jim Haylor made a lot of sense, and it sort of cleared that up. If we hadn't have asked the question, it never would have happened. So I think we have to always remember who we are and why we're here.
Thank you. So unless there are any other questions for Claire, then we look forward to receiving your report in due course.
Thank you.
So moving on then to item 13, the final item. So this is the future dates of meetings. So they're not. So the next one is the 23rd of June, which is the annual meeting. So we will be expecting the annual report from the OPCC, which is in a sense a bit pointless because it's a review of the previous year under the command of a new commissioner who will be setting a new plan. So in some ways it's not particularly useful, but it is useful for the public to really see what has been happening and what the impact of COVID particularly has been. So we've got suggestions for reports to that meeting, we did request an update on the impact of COVID on policing. So I think we should have that at the next meeting. And it also would seem sensible that, since it will be the first meeting for a new commissioner, that they use that opportunity to set out what their approach will be, what they expect their relationship with the panel to be, and so on. Because I think that in a sense that's where the relationship starts. So, does any member have any suggestions for additions or comments on that, Councillor Lim?
Would that, as I'm quite new to the panel, I would just like to know, would that be too soon to ask him about what his plans are for the CSPs?
Or her.
Oh, sorry, or her, yeah.
Well, I mean, we can certainly ask that question at the meeting, and I could put it in as a note that is an area of particular interest for the panel when the OPC prepares the report. But given that it will only be a month and 6 weeks after the election, I'm not sure they will have any firm policies on that, because they'll still be working out budget and priorities and so on. So, but we can ask the question now, certainly.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Or so we're happy to request. So in addition to the annual report, we're requesting an update on COVID and an invitation to the Commissioner to essentially set out their stall, in particular the relationship with the panel and any specific policies that they're planning to bring forward, particularly innovative ones. I mean, Jason Ablewhite actually was very clear on what his strategy was, and one of the sort of innovative things that he brought in, I'm not sure how successful it's been, was reducing reoffending, and he put quite a lot of store by that. And it would be useful to understand before we see the Great Police and Crime Plan, what are they going to be some of the drivers that go into that. Okay, any other comments on that? So if you could just note the other dates, which are the 15th of September, 10th of November, 2nd of February 2022, with the 16th of February jotted in case we vetoed that precept, and then the 23rd of March 2022. I'm not sure those dates are on the agenda pack, so does anyone want me to repeat those dates? So we've got the next one's 23rd of June, then the 15th of September, then the 10th of November, then the 2nd of February 2022 for the precept, and the 16th of February to be just penciled in, and then the 23rd of March 2022. Councillor Tierney.
Yeah, Chairman, I presume these will be confirmed by email in the usual way.
Yes. But now I've got your attention, it's worth getting them noted. But yes, Jane will circulate those dates. So are there any other questions or anything? Or okay, in which case that's the end of the meeting, and we can stop the live stream. So thank you very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to seeing at least some of you in a few months' time.
Yes, and thank you,
Edward.
Members as well, because obviously we don't know what the makeup's going to be of this panel. So just thank you to all for being really supportive to everybody. It's been a really lovely panel.
Thank you.
And good luck, Nikki, as well. And sorry that I only said him. I didn't mean anything.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you, Edward. Bye.